everybody, it's Isaiah with the O&B Puckcast, episode number 56, a special afternoon edition. So we're here to give you a Flyers camp update. We have a special guest with us. We'll introduce him, but right now want to say hello to our buddy from National Puck, Brotherly Puck, Dan, a Flyer fan. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. It's a nice day, and the season's getting ever closer, so it's always good when Flyers are just around the corner.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, Chef has the day off. Well, not really. He's actually at Steam Pub in Southampton cooking stuff up. He may join us later. I'm not sure. We'll see how that works out. But, of course, always from the fourth period .com, we have Anthony DeMarco.
How's it going, guys? I'm doing great. Really excited to get this matinee show underway.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a first for us, and we're proud to be able to bring it to you before our preview show, which is coming up next week. We'll talk more about that later. But first, we have a special guest from Broad Street Hockey back with us again, our buddy Johan Gärtner. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, thank you. How are you guys doing? I'm excited to be here again. It should be a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a lot to talk about, and we're going to dip into, with the first shot out of the gate, gents, Chuck Fletcher came out on the initial exhibition game and said, last year, very few players played to their potential. And I thought it was good. It was refreshing to hear that. And it gave everybody, the fans and the organization, a particular tenor that there's a sense of urgency. And we saw that. Johan, let me start with you. The Flyers kind of were mucking and grinding and not really playing that well over the first three games. And Alain Vigneault, it just says, wait a minute, this process is not proceeding to the pace we need it to. So they made some cuts early, and I think there was a message that was sent, and we saw the results last night in the game versus the New York Rangers.
I think what I like the most is no matter if it's good or bad, the complete honesty so far from Vigneault on basically everything is really refreshing. And I think them cutting some players early, I just think that's a good thing, because if you think back in other years, it's basically been them struggling out the gate. So maybe this is a way for them to not do that, which would be refreshing, to say the least. So I only see positives from them using the veterans, if you want to call them that, the players who will actually stick with the NHL roster to give them more games. I just think that's good for the team.
No, absolutely. I think that's where they had to go. I mean, you couldn't go with a process where, Dan, where they're playing like a C team on, what was it? It was Thursday night versus the Bruins. It was
that was rough.
Yeah, it was the Providence Bruins and five NHL players along with backup goalie Yarrow Hullock, and they just wiped the floor with pretty much a Flyers A squad and a missing Sean Couturier, which we'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, I mean that kind of was a clarion call for, hey, this is not going the way it needs to go. If, like Johan said, they're going to get off to the start they need to.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the brutal honesty from both Fletcher and Alain Vigneault about the lack of whatever you want to call it right now, the energy, let's say, to start the season. So it is good that he's saying that kind of stuff. There was a brutal game against the Bruins, and quite frankly, both the Islanders games were kind of brutal as well. So it was definitely nice to see them come out yesterday night against the Rangers and just play strong. It was a roster that's going to look fairly similar to what the regular season roster will look like, and they played strong, and hopefully they can look like that more often, because that's the kind of team that I want to be watching.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they have to have a sense of urgency. And after the first few games, Anthony, I'm thinking to myself, boy, we've seen this before. And this just can't continue. And it harkened me back to the prediction that we made that the Flyers, as presently constituted, are probably going to need to make some kind of trade to make the playoffs, which seems to be an absolute must this year.
Well, yeah, Dan and I talked about it yesterday on Brotherly Pod that if the Flyers start spinning their tires much like they have in seasons past, that one would have to think that a major trade around, let's say, a Jakub Voracek or James Van Riemsdyk would have to be in the cards. During the Dave Haxtell era, it was always the first few months of October, November that really set the Flyers back and started behind the eight ball. And then they would always have a solid December and January, but they could never catch up. So I like the fact that Fletcher and Vigneault are not settling for mediocrity, even if it is in the preseason, to not result in a similar fate that we know all too well. So, yeah, I would not be surprised in the slightest that if this were to continue, that a trade would be on the horizon for the Flyers.
Yeah, and we're not just throwing that out willy-nilly to get, people listening and saying, hey, the O&B says they're going to make a trade. This is just a general statement of, like, how good do we think this team is relative to the competition and everything like that. And that's just something we put together. But, gents, let's move along. Johan, so they play a rookie game, and, of course, a line with Frost, Farabee, and Ratcliffe in that particular game is going to stand out. We saw some good stuff from Igor Zamula. Phil Myers looked like he didn't belong there, just kind of like Oscar Lindblom the year before. Do you remember back to that game? Any kind of impressions if you had the opportunity to see that?
I think, like you said, the big three with Ratcliffe, Frost, and Farabee kind of stood out for me. It's weird when someone like Phil Myers is there because he just looks so much bigger than everyone else. He just looks like like you said, he doesn't belong just by looking at him because he's such a big guy. But then you remember he's still very young. But I think Sandstrom was pretty good.
Yeah.
Much better than Ustimenko. So it's going to be interesting to see not just what, because I probably think that Frost and Farabee might get sent down at the start, just from the comments from Vigneault yesterday, I think it was.
Right.
But so it will be interesting. So if they both get sent down, watching the Phantoms is going to be a lot of fun. If that happens, I obviously hope at least one of Frost and Farabee makes the team. But I'm not sure. I would have liked someone like David Kasha to maybe be even better. Not that he was bad or anything, but someone who actually has some experience because he was really good in the SHL
right
a couple of years back. So I would have preferred if he maybe stood out more. But other than that, I thought it was a good game, and of course they lost in a shootout. Because it's the Flyers after all.
Yeah, well, that's what they do. But the thing was, Sandstrom was very composed looking, but very very athletic at the same time. Ustimenko looked like a guy who's like, oh, this is North America. It's a little different, a little faster. And
it's so difficult to judge preseason games because they switch goaltenders, and a lot of in hockey there's a lot of that's based on how much work you put in a game. So if you have players that are not, especially when you have not the rookie game but the NHL preseason games, like we saw when Flyers basically played the Providence Bruins, you could just see them outworking them, and even though the Flyers had maybe the better players, outworking the opponents can get you quite far in hockey.
Oh, absolutely. The thing is, they were outworking them, and they knew what they were doing because everybody was on the same page, and that was part of the equation as well.
Yeah, so I think that if they played Sandstrom the whole game, they would have won the rookie game pretty comfortably. Yeah. So it's difficult to judge how good or bad they are playing because when they change up the goalies, it can do a big difference, especially when I think the skill level between the two is quite big, and it was the same yesterday when they changed Hart with Berube. Obviously, that didn't really matter because they were already winning 4-0, so it didn't make that big of a difference. But you could tell straight away that it is a big difference.
Well, I think there's a gap there because a lot of the Flyers' younger players are not up to speed yet, and it's still going to take a long time before, when one player's ushered out for contract reasons, you have that other player ready to step in, and that takes almost it seems like it takes like a decade to do that. And if Ron Hextall were here, I think it would still be grinding away with that. But the Flyers are very uneven in their prospect depth in terms of high quality, and there's pretty good quality is not there. You go more or less to mediocre.
Yep.
Yeah, and that was something Charlie O'Connor made a reference to. So, as it turns out, Dan, that Isaac Ratcliffe kind of stood out as someone in subsequent games who isn't quite there yet. He may be joined, like Johan said, by his buddies Frost and Farabee. That remains to be seen. But so the Flyers made some cuts, and the real contenders for spots, seem in addition to the others, seem to be Rubtsov, Twarynski, maybe Bunnaman, maybe Mark Friedman, and a defenseman named Sam Morin.
The greatest defenseman of all time, Sam Morin.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, Carson Twarynski certainly looked like he earned a spot after last night's game against the Rangers. I mean, he did a little bit of everything last night. He was great. I don't know what he or Bunnaman, what their chances are of making the roster, at least this season, but I definitely think they could be good bottom six guys in the future. But, it'll be interesting to see what Frost and Farabee end up doing. I mean, with Patrick hurt and there's already a third line right wing open, you could fill him with Rubtsov and players like that, the younger guys, to kind of let Frost and Farabee play bigger minutes at the AHL level and get them ready, which is kind of what I was hinting at all along. I wrote an article a week or so ago called The Legion of Soon, and why you should keep those three, Frost, Farabee, and Ratcliffe together, let them develop, and then bring them up all at once and dominate from there, which I think is a good perspective. And it does kind of sound like AV has been hinting at that. He's been given some coy kind of comments about, he doesn't believe the talent has an age, and if you're ready, you can play here, and who knows. So I don't know what happens here, but, given that they're going over to Prague, they may carry a couple extra bodies with them in case of injury anyway. So who knows? It'll be interesting to see what happens here over the next week of preseason games.
Yeah. The thing is, when you look at Frost and Farabee, Anthony, some of the kind of cryptic remarks almost by AV seem to indicate there is an opening there if these guys kind of stand out the way Twarynski did last night. But failing that, it's, I haven't seen the performance like Vorobiev last year was overwhelming. It's like, oh, he's making the team, and he actually played well the first couple of games before he petered out. But I haven't seen that. And I think they have been put in really good positions to make that move if they really are ready to get more than like a nine game tryout.
Well, the opportunity's there, with the injuries to Pitlick and Nolan Patrick and the vacant right wing spot on the third line to start camp. It was there to be had. And, Farabee was starting the training camp with Couturier and Giroux, and even Frost has had some good looks with some line mates. So I think that if they do step up, the opportunity is there to grab. But like you mentioned, I think they really haven't stood out in a big enough way to cement themselves in the lineup.
Yeah, I don't. And the thing is, when you look at guys like Bunnaman, who actually prior to last night, I think was actually a little better than Twarynski, I think is it possible that with the size and speed and the way they get in on the forecheck for, a bottom six role, Johan, is it really maybe time to move on from a guy like Michael Raffl? And there's nothing wrong with Raffl. He's a Swiss Army knife and all that. But, at some point you do want to make room for these kids. and you kind of have a facsimile, like Bunnaman and Twarynski, a little different. Bunnaman's a center, can play center. But, I mean, it might be that time. It might be a message being sent.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with Twarynski and Bunnaman for that matter, but definitely Twarynski last night was really good. Every shift almost, if you could see him make a difference. I don't know if it's time to move away from Raffle, but I don't think that someone watching Bunnaman and Twarynski playing that well, I think it kind of, at least in my eyes, it should guarantee that someone like Chris Stewart shouldn't be getting a job. So, but I don't know. I still think Michael Raffle is a good player to have. I could see them moving him if they would need cap space for something. But other than that, I still think he fills a good role in the bottom six on the fourth line. Assuming that's where they keep playing him and not on the first line with Giroux like Haxtell did in the playoffs, which was interesting. But yeah, I don't think it's time to move on from him yet. But I think it's just a matter of time before someone of the kids will take his spot.
Yeah, and it's the role. I think there's a couple things I want to kind of laid out there. Number one, I'm always the one who's a big advocate for don't read too much in the exhibition game performances. But since you're talking about teams that most of the time are half of them are AHLers or prospects, and the other half are NHLers that are going like three-quarter speed. You know, the pace and the quality of play is going to pick up. And this is what happened to Vorobiev. But if you're talking about a winger on a fourth line, you know, you have a little more slack there. You kind of like, I think Bunnaman and Twarynski have a pretty high floor. And the risk is not quite as great as it would be with a center or somebody who's going to get peak time like Farabee and Frost. Because like Dan alluded to, those guys need minutes. If they're playing 9-10 minutes a night, they'd be better off getting more time, you know, playing first line at Lehigh Valley.
Yeah. So what's important to remember is someone like Bunnaman and Twarynski is not competing for the same spots as someone like Frost or Farabee.
Exactly.
You can play Bunnaman and Twarynski in a fourth line role for 9-10 minutes, and that's fine. But you can't do that with the other prospects.
No, exactly. It defeats the purpose.
Exactly.
So these are the kind of things that they have to weigh, and that kind of goes into those comments by AV talking about we're going to do what's best for the team, and there's a lot to work through with these guys. And then, you know, that was after he said Twarynski was the best player on the ice. So, you know, take from that what you will. But I want to go to Dan on this because we got to talk about Sam Morin, and and Dan, we have to be serious now. Where does he fit? You know, Derek Bob had a good article at PSN, and you know, he kind of talked about Sam Morin being in purgatory, and in a way, he is. It's like if the third pairing defenseman is going to be Phil Myers, and he has 8 games of NHL experience, and wouldn't you want a veteran with him? And if that's the case, what kind of player do you want for a 7th defenseman when you know that Sam hasn't played, he played 24 pro games over the last 2 years, 7 in the NHL? He needs playing time no matter where he's at. He's not going to get it with the Flyers.
Yeah, realistically, he is the odd man out right now. He's probably the 7th guy, maybe even 8th, if, you know, depending on how, you know, Alemio feels about Robert Haig and what he brings to the table. I don't know. I mean, you can't send him down without going through waivers, right. And chances are, you know, a 6'7", 230-pound, you know, former first-round pick defenseman is going to be claimed by somebody, you know, on a 2-year contract making $700,000. So I mean, he would be the perfect fit somewhere else, but I don't know what they do with the guy. I don't know if he's going to be the 7th or they're going to move on from him. I don't know. I can't imagine his trade value is all that high, but I don't know. It very much is a purgatory situation right now, and it'll be interesting to see kind of who wins the battle for the 7th, whether it be Morin or Robert Haig.
Yeah, and Anthony, it looks like they've switched the pairs back and forth, but I do think that it's going to be Provorov with Niskanen, Sanheim, or Gostisbehere with Braun. But and Myers on that third pair, depending on how they go. And that's just why I talked about last show about option C. Maybe they don't really like Haig, but he has experience. Morin is just not ready because he's rusty or what have you. And what do you think about some of the options behind them? Like Chris Bigrod had a couple nice moments against Boston and in some other games. And who have they got? Andy Walensky, but he's hurt. And Mark Friedman and guys like that.
Well, Mark Friedman, from all accounts, has impressed a lot, and a lot of people feel like he's been better than Haig and Morin. I think a guy like Nate Prosser could add a veteran stay-at-home presence, especially if they are lacking a right-shot defenseman, which now the Flyers seemingly have a left-right on every pairing. So it's not like they're lacking depth. Fletcher went out and got these guys like Prosser and Bigros and Wotherspoon, who could jump into the NHL if need be. Bigros is still a young guy at 24 years old. So if Haig and more so Samuel Morin cannot prove to be adequate spare options as the 7-8, I don't think the Flyers would hesitate to move on to guys like Friedman or Bigros or even Nate Prosser.
Yeah, I could definitely see that for a number 7 spot. And we're talking about guys, except for Niskanen last year, have been pretty durable. So you always get nicked up on defense, but yeah, that'll be something to watch. Whether they might want option C, but like you're saying, Anthony, they do have a lot of guys that could step in like that. To me, it comes down to I'm looking at Mark Friedman, Johan. What would you say if you're looking at Friedman and Haig? Haig's going to be good on the penalty kill, but he's going to bank the puck off the glass and the boards. Friedman is probably a better outlet passer, would you say? And that might be something that appeals to AV. And I think Friedman is what he is by this point. I don't know if the ceiling is going to be much higher. Maybe that's the real choice that they're making.
It's difficult because, as you just mentioned, a bunch of different names. There's 5-6 defensemen who can fill that role as a 6 or 7. So I can't even remotely figure out who is going to win that job. What I do think is that I know what Robert Haig is, but I don't know what Samuel Morin is. I don't know what Friedman can be. So if anything, I'd move on from Haig because I just personally, I don't think he's good at all. I don't think he's an NHL defenseman. And the way he plays the game is, to me, outdated, and it doesn't really fit what this team is trying to do. And they also already replaced him with Braun, who is a better version of him.
Yeah. I mean, coming from a countryman, that's really harsh, but we understand.
Yeah.
So it really. I know you'd stick up for him if you could, but nah. That I think
the funny thing is that's not the way he used to play. He used to be a two-way mobile defenseman, and the only way he got to the NHL is by changing up his game. It's not the way he's played the game for years and years. So I give all credit to him to actually make it to the NHL and adapting his game to what the coaches wanted him to do. I just don't think it's good enough.
Right. He had a skill set to be a more offensive defenseman at lower levels, but up here it just didn't translate. Yeah. It's happened with many players. And it's just, that comes back to why you got to make sure that if you're going to keep a guy on a team and instead of letting him develop at the AHL, you really have to make sure, because I don't know, maybe Robert Haig was, I guess, at Lehigh Valley long enough, but there are players that once they get to the league, like Johan was saying, Dan, they're going to do anything they can to stay in. And that means they might emphasize other parts of their game and not completely develop other areas where they could move up a line to a different tier of player. And, it just seems to reemphasize that particular point.
Yeah, and I thought this was going to go towards like a Chris Stewart kind of question here, but
No.
trying to do whatever you can to make the NHL roster. But yeah, prospects, and again, I think that's where guys like Twarynski and Bunnaman kind of have the advantage of making the team this season, is they can play that kind of bottom six role, and they can score some goals, play a little two-way game, so bring the physicality. So they can do a little bit of anything. It's going to be interesting to see moving on how they fill in that bottom six, and how guys like, again, Rubtsov is another good example. Can he bring the complete package at the NHL level?
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, let me just say this about Chris Stewart. It's a valiant effort. When you're taking dumb penalties in exhibition games, a lot of times it's either your mind is not thinking fast enough, or the game is just too fast for you, or you don't know what else to do because you just really aren't good enough. So you're trying to make something happen that's not there. So he ends up in a penalty box. And while I agree that without Simmons and without some of the guys they got rid of, there is a toughness issue that if you could fill it with a player like that, hey, you know what? As a 13th forward, okay, I don't think Stewart has even shown me that yet. And
yeah, I think he looks out of place.
I do. It's a shame because I like the guy.
Yeah,
I like his skill set. When he sits down on a shot, he can really shoot the puck, but he can't get to the spots fast enough, and he can't keep up with the pace of play. And I don't think it's going to work out. And certainly guys like Curtis Gabriel, who looked like a clown out there half the time, to be honest. And what's his name, Andrioff? He's not showing me anything.
Yeah.
What's
a bit concerning?
Yeah.
Sorry for cutting off.
Yeah,
what I was going to say before. What's a bit concerning is last year Twarynski was really good as well in camp, and was one of the last few cuts. And then when he went back, he didn't really have a good AHL season. And I mean, he's still young, so it's nothing to worry about. But I think that it would be even more. I think he would have gotten his spot now if he would have carried on last season's preseason performance to having a really good AHL year and then come into this camp and play the way he is now. I think he would have been a lock by now.
Yeah.
But I think the management knows that he had a good camp last year, and then he didn't have a good year in the AHL after that. So I think that's probably a concern they have.
Yeah, I could see that because the guy that was the first name out of Brett Flair's mouth was Connor Bunnaman, and he had a really good year, and they're kind of similar players in some ways.
Yeah.
So now I was looking at Tony Andrikaitis from Inside AHL Hockey. You might want to give those guys a subscription. It's a good value. You get a lot of inside info, and particularly with the prospects that are going to be down there, for however long they might be down there. I would check out Inside AHL Hockey. But he was saying that Twarynski was a tale of two seasons, and that he was much better toward the second half of the season. So, but Bunnaman had the better year. I tell you, looking at some of the guys we talked about, Gabriel Stewart, Andrioff, I mean, it wouldn't bug me at all if both of those guys made it. Because I think the ceiling's not high. The floor is high enough, and the ceiling's not high enough. Like Dan was saying earlier, it's like, what do you got to lose? Because, I was thinking back to 84, 85, when the Flyers had a changing of the guard. Bob Clark retires, becomes a GM. Right before the season, he trades Darryl Sittler. He gets Joe Patterson, and the more important player was Murray Craven. And that's the year they broke in Tocchet, Zezel, Derek Smith, a whole bunch of new guys. And Derek Smith and Twarynski are kind of like the same guy. And I think the Flyers need some of that to get some new personality. It was one of the first things we saw out of the gate, Anthony, was they have no personality. I mean, we were talking about before the show, Valerie Camillo, who's one of the executives, was trying to, I don't know if she was trying to sell insurance or tickets last night. And it's like her monotone was perfect, was a perfect metaphor for what this team has done to the fans. And it's like bored us to tears. Thank God they showed up last night, but I just think an infusion of youth, particularly at these lower lines, I'd rather risk that than go high wire with some prospects that might run into a wall.
Yeah, well, it just shows the difference from what it was, let's say, even 10 years ago with the core like Richards and Hartnell and Pronger and all those guys. But yeah, I think that bringing guys like Stewart and Andrioff and Gabriel, like they have some NHL potential to stand on, but they don't box out the young guys like Bunnaman or Turinsky should they push for those jobs. So that's where I try and stay a bit optimistic with this training camp that, Fletcher left the door open for all these kids to take the spot if they so choose to. If they play well, it's not like they have guys that are boxing them out. Like Andrioff and Gabriel seem more like insurance policies should these kids not be able to step up to the plate and grab those positions. Yeah. I'm pulling for the kids. I think you don't have a lot to lose with it. Well, you kind of knows what the other guys pretty much are in Andrioff and Gabriel, and more so Chris Stewart. But yeah, I'm hoping that there could be more of an injection of youth here to give some excitement to the fans.
Yeah, absolutely. And give the team a little bit different of a personality. I mean, after all, after last year was just a freaking disaster, which we talked about ad nauseum. But, gents, let's not overlook between our last show and today, the Flyers' two big RFAs, Ivan Provorov and Travis Konechny, each signed 6-year deals. So, Dan, let me start with you. What do you think of Provorov's deal, and what kind of career track do you think that he's following?
Provorov's contract was great. Especially with all the rumors going in that, he was looking for $10 million, and obviously I didn't expect that was going to happen, but yeah. I definitely thought we were going to see, kind of an 8x8 for Provorov. So the fact that it was a 6x6.75 is great. The cap hit is a little lower than I was expecting, and the years are nice. I think a lot of people kind of hit the panic button with him last season, after he had a down year, but I don't think that's going to be the commonplace for him. I definitely think we're going to see him improve, and there's no reason he shouldn't be better. He's going to have a great defense core to work with this season, and he won't be the only guy back there forced to carry the weight. So I think he's going to be great. I think it's going to be a great contract in the short term, and it's going to look even better in the long term.
Yeah, I think that what we saw a couple years ago offensively from Provorov was probably an anomaly. I compare his career track to Ryan McDonough. Definitely some offense, but maybe not translating as much on the power play, and more of a two-way defenseman who can definitely bring some offense, and a good signing by the Flyers. And whether he ends up with Niskanen or Braun or last night with Sanheim, I don't know. As long as he plays well, that's all we care about. But Johan, you follow that up at missing just a couple days of training camp. Travis Konechny, 6 years, $5.5 million. Dom Lucian at The Athletic calls it almost the perfect contract. Everybody's raving, the bean counters, the non-bean counters. What say you?
I really like the contract. I don't think the player Konechny has been so far is what he's going to be. I think there's that extra level. I think he can develop into maybe not the Mitch Marner being above point per game, but I think he can get up to 70 points. And that is if he gets more power play time, and if they have, especially if he's on the second power play unit and it's a power play unit that can actually do something, then I think he can definitely reach that. Yeah. And he's the perfect complement to someone like Couturier and Giroux, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. They need a catalyst, someone who is very quick. It's not just speed. Yeah. He's very quick in short spaces, and he has hockey IQ to get to scoring areas.
Yeah, and we're talking about 5.5, right?
Right.
Or was this 5.75?
5.5.
No, 5.5. And he this was 6 years.
It's for 6 years, and he's 22.
Yeah, so he's just getting started, I think. I think that in just a couple of years, this could be a Sean Couturier-looking contract. Not that he's going to be the same player as Couturier, but the same value I could see happening.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
I wouldn't be surprised if he breaches 30 goals, maybe even this year.
Yeah, it's not impossible. He's had 24 the last 2 years, and it was a bit
of that's with no power play time, basically. Well, he has power play time, but not any production.
Yeah, I mean, the second unit power play has not been set up. Part of the issue is he's a little bit like Giroux, in that he's kind of the guy you want to build your power play around because he's the most dynamic presence on that second unit, but they don't have the right complementary pieces, or at least they haven't had them in the past.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
So I think he will take a big step forward in his production, and I hope it's this year. But I could see him having a similar year to last season, maybe like a tiny step forward. But I think that it's just about a matter of time before he will really.
When he really breaks out,
Yeah, breaks out. That was what I was looking for.
Yeah, well,
so I really like the contract.
Yeah, you got a second language. I mean, we got to forget. You're so seamless with English. Forget it. I can do a Nick impression, but that's about it. That's the closest I come to Swedish. Anthony, just like Provy's contract was somewhat framed by the deals for Zach Werenski and maybe Josh Morrissey to some degree. It looks like that TK's contract was being compared somewhat to Teravainen, Bo Horvat, and in the bad scenario, maybe Alexander Wenberg, and that would be a bad situation for the Flyers. But, he came in right where you would expect.
Yeah, in terms of long-term contracts, it is exactly that. It's pretty much identical to the contract that Jonathan Drouin got 2 years ago from the Canadiens. And when Drouin signed that contract, if you compare the numbers, he actually had relatively identical numbers to Travis Konecny. I personally thought it was going to come in around 4.5, but I didn't expect it to be a 6-year contract. I think it's a contract that's going to age very well. Konecny has 24 goal seasons in each of the last 2 years. He had 48 points, I believe, last season. So he's knocking on the door of 50 points. So he's right there with all those guys in the good scenario. The one thing with Konecny, I think, is just developing, the ability to score consistently and not go on such hot streaks, and that maybe he could score and be productive away from Giroux and Sean Couturier. It seems as though he's only used at his maximum and he only plays at his optimal potential when he's beside the two best players on the team. So maybe the ability for him to produce, let's say, with Kevin Hayes or Nolan Patrick in the future would give the Flyers more flexibility in their line combinations, and that would make that contract seem all the more better. But like you said, it falls in exactly where he should be, and in terms of the years he got, it's hard to argue with it.
Yeah, you bought, what would that be? They bought one of the UFA years, because a 3-year deal, it still would have been an RFA that was arbitration eligible or something like that. But we don't have to worry about that. They went 6 years, and I hate talking about contracts and stuff like that. I think it's boring to listen to. But anyway, just one thing. Brandon Murphy pointed out a stat that Travis Konecny has as many or more even strength goals. We talked about the power play that we hope he'll improve upon. But he has as many as more even strength goals than Crosby, Panarin, Pasternak, Duchesne, Tays, Eichel, Radulov, Kucher, Pavelski, Malkin, Besser, Scheifele, Barkov, Line, Kessel, Stamkos, and the list goes on. So if we could just get, like Johan was saying, we get a little bit more productivity from that second unit, and you get a couple. There's your 30 goals for Travis Konecny right there, between just natural improvement and a little bit of production on the second power play. But so those guys are in, and it's a full house now. But Dan, let me ask you about this. We talked about Stewart and all that. one of the things I was thinking about, if they were worried about toughness, a guy like Patrick Maroon was out there, and it's not like Fletcher hasn't alluded to it. It's one of the reasons he brought Chris Stewart in, and I thought that would have been a nice fit. I know you don't want to block a kid, but I just think he's not a great skater, and I understand that, but that might have been a guy who would have been a good fit here.
Yeah, and that's why I'm not overly concerned about Stewart making the team. I think he's probably going to hang around till the last group of cuts, but I don't think he's going to make it. I think if they wanted somebody for that role as kind of an agitator, a fourth line, I guess grinder isn't the proper term in 2019 anymore. They really don't exist. But somebody like Maroon, you typically count on for 10, maybe even 15 goals a season. So I think if they were looking to specifically address that, they probably would have done that in free agency.
Yeah. We'll see what happens. I mean, if you read 31 Thoughts, Anthony, it seems like there's still going to be a fair amount of movement right before the season ends. I mean, the season begins, because it seems like there's a lot of balls in the air in places like Winnipeg, maybe even Columbus might be looking to pounce on some opportunities with some of the big losses they've taken.
Well, when you have guys unsigned like Braden Point and Mikko Rantanen and Matthew Tkachuk and Patrick Laine and Kyle Connor, you have to think that there will be a lot of balls in the air, because it's been rumored that the Flames have to move a body, preferably Michael Frolik, in terms to get under the salary cap to sign Matthew Tkachuk. So, yeah, you have to think that there will be a lot of teams looking to pounce. You bring up Columbus, that's a team that, at least in my opinion, desperately could use some help between the pipes. They're putting a lot of faith on Joonas Korpisalo. You never know about other teams with large amounts of cap space. Maybe the Ottawa Senators could take on some salary in addition to adding, let's say, a high draft pick or a good prospect. But I think this RFA class has really set the stage for a lot of teams to have to get under the salary cap and move out some bodies that they would have otherwise not wanted to. And that just seems like the landscape for the current day NHL. Winnipeg in particular, they lose Dustin Byfuglien now because he's uncertain about his future, along with the three other defensemen, Trouba, Sherratt, and Myers. And then they still have Laine and Connor that they can't sign, at least as of right now. So you never know as of right now what's going to go on with these teams and how they're going to fit under the cap with their RFAs.
Yeah, you just don't know, and it was just this morning it was announced. And what is really, it sounds bad, what was really a procedural move that had to be made by the Winnipeg Jets. Dustin Byfuglien has been suspended, and I'm sure this is not a shock to him. This is what happens when a player is not sure if he wants to even play hockey anymore. Is there anything else that you've heard in regards to that or other things from the TFP, thefourthperiod.com rumor mill?
Well, there's rumors surrounding Patrick Laine. There was talk of maybe the Sabres dangling the likes of Rasmus Ristolainen, trying to get Patrick Laine, and not a one-for-one deal, obviously, but it'd be plus in addition to Ristolainen. But, the Jets now, I believe they have about $22 or $23 million in cap space to sign guys like Connor and Laine, but then you get all these comments from Patrick Laine this past week of criticizing who he's been playing with, essentially throwing shade at the head coach Paul Maurice and his line mates Little and Nikolai Ehlers. So it's not really a situation that you want to trade a guy who has scored over 100 goals in his first 3 years in the NHL. But at the same time, if he doesn't want to be there and he's giving ridiculous contract demands, maybe you entertain it. At this time of year, teams aren't looking to make monumental shifts like that. But you'd have to think that if the Jets want to get under the cap and sign guys like Connor and Scheifele, maybe bottom six guys like Mathieu Perreault or Adam Lowry would become cap casualties in such a situation.
Yeah, that'll be a place to watch. It's just, normally, of course, this time of year you wouldn't have that kind of movement, but we've never had an RFA class like this. So this is kind of like a paradigm shift for the league, and it'll be interesting to watch that. We got to talk about Johan. Now, Chuck Couturier shows up for practice today, so everybody takes a sigh of relief because he took a maintenance day, which generally means that a player is kind of sore, banged up, whatever, maybe a minor injury. But if he takes 2 in a row, that's something to raise your eyes about. But one thing we all agree, that it's been announced that it seems unlikely that Nolan Patrick will start the season with this mysterious upper body injury. And let me say,
I'm so confused about that one.
Yeah, it's an injury that Chuck Fletcher says, quote, won't require surgery. Was that a curveball by Chuck Fletcher to get us off the trail of a concussion, or is it something like I don't know. Nobody knows what this. And he's playing golf supposedly. I don't know.
Yeah, there was video footage of him training by himself. And I don't think if it was a concussion he would do that, because it didn't look like he was just skating to skate for a bit. He was going on kind of high speed, so it feels like it shouldn't be a concussion.
No.
But at the same time, I don't know. I'm really confused about what it can be. It's not.
Yeah, they call it upper body injury, and it could be a lower body injury because they're trying. I mean, what would opposing teams target? I would think shoulders.
Yeah,
maybe something like that. I don't know.
It's weird because I just don't think it's a concussion. So it can be, when they say upper body injury, it can basically be everything from the hip up, I guess.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
I even put out there, what is it, something like colitis or something? I don't know. He's close to...
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's such a shame because he really needs to have a good season.
Then that is the question. Dan, when you look at... even if Morgan Frost doesn't make it, the word is they want to keep him at center. And that seems to be kind of coming across through the grapevine. And to me, that's like a message of like, okay, well, Hayes is going to be here for at least like 5 of those 7 years. Couturier is not going anywhere. And they want to keep Morgan Frost at center. It's like a message to Nolan Patrick. What? I mean, eventually they're going to have to do the business or get off the pot with what's going on at that position.
Yeah, and Anthony and I talked about this a little bit yesterday on our show as well. It's a very interesting kind of dynamic. Couturier is not going anywhere, and Kevin Hayes is here for the foreseeable future. Right now, the third-line center role is the only place it's open, and Nolan Patrick hasn't exactly... impressed, hasn't exactly earned the role, I guess you could say. And if Frost passes him on the depth chart, which, if Nolan Patrick isn't playing because he's injured, quote unquote, it's only a matter of time before Frost overtakes him. And if that happens, then are you going to leave Nolan Patrick as your fourth line center? I don't know. Who knows kind of what happens after that. But it's Nolan Patrick injury has been very bizarre, and it definitely opens door for Morgan Frost rather.
Yeah, I mean, the timing is horrible, and I just wish Frost was a little bit more emphatic. It seems like he's coming on a little bit. He flashed the other night. I thought him and Farabee were, like, making nice little plays, but again, against a C squad with the Rangers, they had some defensemen. That was basically it. And Shesterkin, their backup, who could be a good goalie someday. But, that's something that's worth watching. That's the one player that I thought, if there's somebody who can really make a difference and push them to be a playoff team, where the Flyers don't have to do a lot of tinkering and worrying about what to do at a deadline or anything, it would be Nolan Patrick. And here we are, he's hurt.
Yeah.
And it's really, really frustrating. So,
for me, when I think about this team, when Nolan Patrick is healthy, and then you look at the additions on the defense, it just feels like every player slots in perfectly. You have players that will help Sanheim, and players that will help Provorov, so they don't have to be... They're still going to be the guy, if that's what you want to call it, but they actually have veteran help that will help them to fulfill their potential. And then when they add Hayes, it slots Nolan Patrick down, so he gets an easier role as well. So I just think everything, it just fits way better than it did last year. But now with the injury to Patrick, now it's a hole in the middle again. So I don't know what's gonna happen. I think the latest news is that he's not gonna be ready for the season opener. If I'm correct?
It's doubtful.
Yeah.
And he's week to week, whatever that means. So, I'm not really sure. Like you're saying, everything was slotted so perfectly. You imagine if Patrick were playing, what kind of effect that would have on Farabee. Now that Konechny's back. And that he might be a perfect complement, with his aggressive forechecking style. And Nolan Patrick really can be a great shooter. Well, he could be feeding him, and it could be Lindblom. It could make sense, but we'll just have to wait to see how that works out. And taking that theme a little further, Anthony, I was listening to Jason Martinez from 97.5 and the Stick to Hockey podcast, and he was intimating that if the Flyers don't take that next step and look like a team that's headed toward a Stanley Cup contending window, this could be Claude Giroux's last year, because it's like they would always be chasing his prime and being worried about losing that in what I would consider like a Jerome McGinley scenario, that they waited too long to trade him. And I don't want to. Look, the season hasn't even started yet, but it is on our mind. Like if Patrick was healthy, it would really be on our mind. With all these young kids ready, maybe if not now, halfway through the year or next year.
I've been a big proponent in believing that this is the final kick at the can for the Claude Giroux, Jakub Voracek era. And, I did a podcast with Dan saying that I thought Giroux was one of the, if not the greatest Flyer of all time. So it's not a slight on him, but all of his best years have passed by and went on with a general manager who didn't give him support. And 5 years of, quote, rebuilding and retooling and developing, whatever you want to call it. And now he's 32 years old, 31, 32. So if the Flyers fail again, it's hard to see a scenario where they bring back Giroux and maybe Voracek and don't move on and try and maximize the possible return for these guys. They're loaded with prospects, so if these veterans can't lead them to the promised land and at least show signs of advancing, getting into the second or maybe even third round of the playoffs, what would be the point of continuing on this trail that just has not worked for the last half of the decade?
I agree. Yeah, he'll be 32 in January, but I mean, that's, you look back and we talked about before how, unfortunately, with the timing of everything, Ron Hextall probably should have torn this thing down to the studs, but no reason to go there. And we know what the expansion that maybe JVR or Voracek could be guys headed out with the, depending, we might have to add something to the Seattle, whatever they're going to be called. But again, that's for another day. Let's let the season begin and all that. Anybody looking forward to the behind the glass, behind the scenes for the Flyers? It's going to air Wednesday the 24th on NHL Network. I think it's 8 o'clock or 7:30 something. Check your listings on that, but it's definitely Wednesday the 24th. And while it's not going to be like the HBO show with Lavi back in the day, I think it's something the Flyers kind of need for their fans, a look behind the scenes. Dan, what say you?
Yeah, it can't hurt to see this kind of stuff. Obviously, there's going to be no Brizgalov talking about bears and whatnot, but it's going to be fun to watch. It's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be, maybe a little more intimate taste of, Alain Vigneault and such. So, it's going to be interesting to see with the new bodies, and guess we'll get to watch it when it debuts.
Yeah, AV's definitely animated. Imagine, Johan, can you imagine Dave Haxtell on something like that?
I'm still waiting for confirmation if Dave Haxtell has personality or not. So I just don't think that would have been fun to watch. I think that I always enjoyed when they mic up players and behind the scenes stuff. even though the Flyers flight plan they did a couple of years back, I didn't think was that good. But
right, yeah.
I always enjoy all this when you get to follow the players and all that stuff. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, that'll be interesting, and it's coming up this Wednesday, like I mentioned. Just a couple items here. The Flyers have 4 players that made the ESPN top 100 on, what is this, prospects, I think it was. Yeah, and they talked about honorable mentions for Samuel Ursan, and Carter Hart obviously played too many games to be included, but I think they had Frost, Farabee, Ratcliffe, and Cam York, I believe it was. So that was good. And then in the 23 and under rankings, because we have all these listicles, which are articles around the list, the Flyers are number 7 in the league. But, gents, I mean, Anthony, you look at it, the Flyers are out of that era, I believe, where everybody's holding their breath and watching the prospects and can't wait for the draft. The Flyers are going to be a more transactional organization going forward over the next 5 years, because I think there's a sense of urgency, like we opened the show with. I don't think Chuck Fletcher is going to hesitate to make moves to shape this team into the playoff and hopefully cup contender that everybody would like them to be after all this time.
Well, yeah, of course. From the years 2015 to 2018, they had, I believe, 7 first-round picks in 4 drafts. Dan and I have talked about this at length on Brotherly Pod, that they have enough B-level prospects, to field 2 teams. There's no doubt that this organization is loaded with high-end talent in their pipeline. And they continued that trend with Fletcher at this past draft, and I thought he had an excellent draft with Cam York and Bobby Brink headlining it. But as you mentioned, they have to start translating it on the ice. They have not advanced past the first round since 2012. They've won 4 playoff games since 2016. It's great to have a pipeline and to have all these kids who come in training camp and impress and look good on the Phantoms and their respective junior clubs. But after a certain point, the whole goal to building a strong organization is to win at the NHL level. And, if the Flyers need to make an impact move to advance themselves at the deadline, some of these kids may get traded. And it's not always a bad thing to make these moves. So it's great to have all these prospects and want them all to succeed, but sometimes to advance the club at the NHL level, you have to part ways with them at times.
Absolutely. That's what you draft them for. Not only to fill in when, contracts dictate that some people have to exit, but also you have to be able to use them as assets themselves. And if the Flyers trade a first-round draft pick or something, and it was a really good, tangible pickup for them, I think they're at a point where they have to do, make that move if so be it. In the past, people have brought up Patrick Sharp, and that was a bad trade. But I also hear people, Dan, talk about Justin Williams getting moved. Well, you know what? Justin Williams was traded for defense help. Badly needed defense help in the person of Danny Markov when the Flyers are making a realistic cup drive. So that wasn't a bad trade, given that particular context.
Yeah, and I guess it's just the Ron Hextall mentality of, everything is bad and you can't trade a prospect for a 35-year-old. We heard that over and over again. But, again, Justin Williams, sure, he later went on to be, Mr. Game 7 and all this, but he dealt with ACL injuries for years. Yeah. He was injured for most of that time. They dumped him for defense help, which, again, the salary cap ended up ruining. But still, there was nothing he could have done there. It was the right move at the time, whereas the Patrick Sharp move was just stupid. Yeah. But, it's going to come time, again, where Anthony have talked about this, there's so many prospects where not everybody can make it. And fans are going to have to get out of that mindset of drafting and hoarding these prospects and start making the NHL team competitive. So that's probably going to be something we're going to see, come the trade deadline, no matter where the Flyers are at that point.
Yeah.
Could I just jump in for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Just to build off of Dan's point and what you said, Isaiah, I remember when Braden Shen was the best thing since sliced bread when he was drafted by the Los Angeles Kings in, I believe, 2009. And he was well renowned as the best player not in the NHL. You know, the Kings gave the Flyers a hefty haul for Mike Richards, and Braden Shen has had a very good career. Wayne Simmons was one of the best power forwards in the NHL for almost 5 years. But just because you trade good young players and they amount to something and become what people expected they were, doesn't mean it was a bad trade. You know, the Kings won 2 cups with Mike Richards. He was almost irrelevant on the second, but was a big part of the first. You know, I'm sure that they would do that trade 10 times over if you gave them a chance. So even if a player succeeds in his career, much like Patrick Sharp did when the Flyers traded him for Markov in, I believe, 2004, sometimes the present outweighs the future, and not every trade has to be one-sided to make it worthwhile.
No, absolutely. You mean Justin Williams for Danny Markov?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, Patrick Sharp was a flat-out bad trade. It was so bad, even Tim Panaccio got back to me circa, 2001 or 9? I forget when they made that trade, but the first thing he said was when he got back to me, that's a bad trade. But yeah, I remember that.
Matt Ellison, right?
Matt Ellison.
God.
Matt Ellison's a hero. He was a whole.
Yeah, can we not talk about that, please?
Yeah, he's a hero in the KHL. Yeah, but along that theme, just to kind of finish up the point, Jerome McGinley's first ballot Hall of Famer. He was terrific, but Dallas did not regret trading him to get Joe Nieuwendyk and win a cup in '99. So you do what you have to do, and you move on. And Joe Nieuwendyk was part of a Stanley Cup winning team in Calgary too, so he had that credibility. And maybe Dallas doesn't win that cup, even though they were loaded that year with Brett Hull, and they had Madonna, and who was in that? Was that Eddie Belfour?
Yeah, Belfour.
Yeah. So I mean,
and Ken Hitchcock was the coach.
Yeah, Ken Hitchcock, and they had Hatcher and all those guys. So yeah, it was a great team, and Joe Nieuwendyk was an important piece, but it cost him Jerome McGinley. Well, that's what you have to do. So
well, it's even a more recent trade, like when the Penguins picked up Phil Kessel, and I know that we're not comparing a guy like Kapanen to the likes of Iginla, but Kasperi Kapanen has proven to be a very serviceable top 6 forward at a very young age. But I'm pretty sure that the Penguins are perfectly satisfied with that trade.
Yeah, they got free hot dogs with it too, so that was good. But yeah, so we took that act out to Arizona, and that's fine. He almost Phil Kessel almost made Evgeny Malkin retire. Well, that's really funny. Yeah. That whole thing was a fiasco in the making. So they had to get rid of him. Johan, what else is on your mind? Because we're going to start wrapping up, and I know you always have some under the radar thoughts about what's going on with the Flyers.
I feel like we've covered quite a lot. I think the interesting part for me is going to be what are they going to do with that 3C position, because I was a bit surprised that they said that they wanted to keep Frost in the middle, because I feel like if Patrick was healthy, he would probably have played more on the wing through camp.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be interesting to see that part of camp, and just the Rangers game, I don't read too much into it. I think it's, as I said earlier, it's really difficult to judge anything in preseason. I'm not a big preseason guy. It might be because the Flyers normally always suck at preseason. Yeah. No matter who they play. But I liked the effort they put in when they lost the puck, no matter where they lost the puck. And something I really liked when I watched the game yesterday was the power play. Obviously, they didn't play a very good team, but I liked the way they switched things up, so it wasn't static. At some points, people who follow me on Twitter know how much I hate Giroux on the right side, on the power play. Yeah. But I like when they switch it up. So during one of the power plays, they had Giroux on the right side, Borsuk on the left. They had some pressure. Rangers cleared, and then the next time they entered the zone with the same unit, they switched it up, and they had Giroux on the left side. And then on one of the other power plays, Giroux was behind the goal line. I really like the way they switch things up mid-game and during the same power plays. It's not static.
Yeah,
I really like that part.
That's such a good point. If one thing is working and you stick with it, eventually they're going to figure out how to defense it. So
exactly.
It's okay to have Giroux on the right side if it's part of a mix. It's almost like in football, a different formation, and now they're not sure. And from that formation, you can do a couple different things, and you multiply that by 3 or 4 different looks. All of a sudden, things start making sense as long as the guys are comfortable and they're moving the puck around quickly and getting high-quality chances.
Yeah, and to build on that, it started with Giroux was on the right side setting up players, and then they switched it up, and they had Voracek on the right side.
Right.
And they didn't cover for a one-timer. Because the last time they defended on that power play, I think it was the same one. It may have been another power play chance they had, but they didn't cover for the one-timer because they used that to set up with Giroux before. But now when Voracek was available for that one-timer, they didn't have the defenseman in line, and obviously he scored.
Right.
So hopefully more of that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's I give I think it's Turion. It's in dealing with the forwards and the power play and stuff like that. So give him credit. I mean, I love to see the versatility, and also we talked about earlier. I'd love to see more production and at least more pressure with the second unit. So it's not like the first guys come off and it's almost like the penalty's really killed for all intents and purposes. You can't have that. You got to have another, you have to have a threat from both units, understanding the first one's going to be better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right.
Right.
And they have the personnel to have a good second unit now. So I hope in the preseason games to come we get more of a look what the second one can be.
Yeah, we should definitely see more a veteran laden lineup. But that brings us toward the end here, gents. I want to ask Dan, we got to nail down a couple of guesses on what's going to happen here with some of these kids. I think we covered the defense pretty well. We know it's going to be Hart and Elliott in net. But what is the mystery is with Frost, Farabee, Nick Obed-Kubel, who's still got a chance. You got Chwerinsky, maybe Bunneman's got a chance. And Rupsov had one down game because he played three in 4 nights. I think Rupsov is a dark horse contender for a spot still, especially with Patrick injured.
Yeah, I think it seems to feel like Rupsov maybe has, the inline on that fourth line right now. I definitely feel like he's kind of being groomed for that role, and they're really testing him hard. So I think he probably, of all of them, is probably the one with a maybe not guaranteed spot, but probably with the best odds to make the Flyers out of camp.
Yeah, he's the one they've worked on the most. By playing him 3 games in 4 nights, it kind of shows you that, okay, we need to see. It's basically what they did with Konechny. It's what they did with Provorov. When they had to prove themselves. He's not a lock, but I think it would take something pretty special from someone else to take that spot.
Anthony?
Well, I said it yesterday with Dan that I would be shocked if Rupsov doesn't make the team. I think that the fact that he's a centerman, he allows for even a Scott Lawton to move up higher in the lineup.
Right.
Because I felt that Lawton can play in the top 9 as long as he's on the wing. And now, especially with the injury to Nolan Patrick, you may have to start Rupsov and Lawton both at center should Patrick not be available. And as for the rest, it's going to depend on a guy like Tyler Pitlick if he's healthy. And I think it's really up for grabs for guys like Frost and Farabee. But if they can't, take that grasp ring, maybe we see a guy like Andreoff or a potential Chris Stewart grab it here. But I think the only one at this point that I would pretty much guarantee to make the team one way or another, injuries notwithstanding, would be German Rupsov.
Yeah, I think Rupsov has to play well tomorrow if he's playing. I forgot. I had the lineup. I forget. I should check our timeline. Someone posted something about that. And if he is playing in Boston, and just give people the schedule here. That is tomorrow night at 7 in Boston. Then they play the Rangers in New York on Thursday the 26th, and they have their final exhibition game where that's where they fly to Lausanne, Switzerland on the 30th, which is a week from tomorrow. And then they open the season versus the Blackhawks, a weird schedule in Prague. Then they don't play until, so that's the 4th. Then they don't play again until the 9th, and that's their home opener versus the Devils. And then 2 days later, they're on the West Coast. They're playing Vancouver, Calgary, and Edmonton. And then they're back home against Dallas, and things get kind of normalized on the 19th versus Dallas. So it's going to be a crazy schedule. Those long
They never get to start at home.
What's that?
They never get to start at home. They always have some weird schedule
Yeah.
to start the season, it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, this is why it's so important. This means, to me, you look at the schedule, and to me it's really difficult, at least logistically. I mean, Chicago could be a decent team this year. The Devils are at least going to have enthusiasm coming out of the gate. Vancouver's got a lot of dangerous offensive weapons. Calgary's a team that, could be a conference final team if everything goes right for them, particularly in net. Edmonton stinks.
Yeah.
And then there's Dallas at home on the 19th. But so saying that, the Flyers will lose every game we think they should win, and they'll win every game they think they should lose.
Probably.
Probably that's what's going to happen. Oh, by the way, if anybody cares, both Curtis Gabriel and the aforementioned Tyler Pitlick were cleared, although Pitlick was not cleared for contact. So that would make me think he's at least another week or 10 days away from even getting that clearance. But that's just a guess. I can't say for sure. But, gents, I think we've come to the end of yet another O&B Puckcast. And, Dan, any final thoughts?
No, not really. I just want the season to get here already.
Gotcha. Where can people contact you and at your wonderful sites and podcasts?
Yeah, you can find me at Dan the Flyer Fan. You can find the site at Brotherly Puck and the podcast at Brotherly_pod.
Fantastic. And don't forget National Puck and National Pod, too, that are kind of outgrowths of the Brotherly Pod venture. And, of course, from the fourthperiod.com, Anthony DeMarco, any final thoughts from you? And if not, where can people contact you?
My final thoughts would just be, if kids don't make the team in favor of veterans, just trust the coaches, their new coaching staff. I think they should have our benefit of the doubt. Just because a player's older than 26 years old does not mean he's hot garbage. And just because a player's in his early 20s does not make him the better choice. Just give the coaching staff the benefit of the doubt. And you can find me at ademarco25, and you can find my work and everyone else's work who's there at thefourthperiod.com.
Yes, that is thefourthperiod.com, home of Dave Pagnotta, Dennis Bernstein, and many other fine contributors. And so I'm getting from that, Anthony, that cold garbage is still possible.
Yeah.
Okay. Johan, you write and are a contributor for Broad Street Hockey. What are your final thoughts, and where can people contact you?
My final thoughts is I hate September. Give me October and ice hockey. I'm optimistic about the season. I feel like I always am, but this season I feel like the players they have available kind of proves that I should be positive about the season. And I really like we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, about I really like what Vigneault has done so far. So hopefully that's something that continues.
Yeah.
On Twitter you can find me at Johan Gärtner, and you should check out broadcityhockey.com.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thanks for having me.
Yeah, anytime. It's always a pleasure. And I would say that with AV making the effort last night to be up in the box, watching the game with Fletcher and Flair, or Flair it's pronounced, that he's trying to be on the same page with these guys in evaluating them, and I like that. So I think it speaks. Now, this is something that AV has said he's done before, but it speaks to me also to a sense of urgency. One of the reasons I'm optimistic the Flyers are going to be a playoff team, and I'll keep harping on this, is I think they're going to do and be willing to do what it takes to make that happen, because it's time. The time for building is over. The time for winning is now, and that we'll see what happens. So we'll catch the Flyers again tomorrow night, the 23rd, and they'll be in Boston, and we'll see what happens with some of the changes they make. So you can follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. Please subscribe. It really helps us. If you could give us a rating on iTunes or any of the platforms. We're on so many: Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Google Podcasts. We got our own YouTube channel. You name it. So we appreciate your listenership. And next week, follow the O&B Puckcast Twitter account, because we're going to have a big announcement coming up. We have some big changes on the way. We think you're going to like them. And we got a big season preview show with a wonderful guest who's been our most popular guest ever. So hopefully I've teased enough so you'll catch us next time. And until then, everybody, take care.